Hey, welcome back to Unschooled Theology. I am one of your hosts, Derek, and with me is Evan. Good day to you, sir.
Good day to you, sir.
All right, so we are up to Genesis 3, verse 6. So let me read that real quickly. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate. Real quick, it's worth noting, I didn't mention this last episode, we're done with the serpent's communication, right? At this point, the serpent's done talk. I don't think we hear from the serpent again. Actually, I can't remember if he responds to a challenge from God. I think not.
He gets cursed. So
He gets cursed, but
still
I
present.
can't remember if he says anything. Yeah,
I don't think
he's
he says
present in the
anything.
story, but
So
I don't
still,
think,
yeah.
we're done with his words, I guess. So what we're going to do here with this verse is episode we're going to focus. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm just going to note that so oftentimes the way temptation works.
Oh yeah.
Or especially if there's a person involved in your downfall, they bring you to the place where you jump off the cliff and then they don't say anything else. There's no defense. There's no continuing. There's no justification. They have brought you to that place, and now you're the one who gets to bear that.
Yes. Yep.
So yeah,
yep, for sure. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to focus this episode on the woman's response, and then we'll look at what happens with the man in the next episode, right? And as a quick reminder here, we are looking at this as sort of the story of universal sin. This is sort of how all of us come to sin. And we are looking at the woman in the story here as being sort of symbolic of the feminine instinct, which we all have, right? It exists in all of us. It's, just different proportionally. So what we're seeing, I guess, here, symbolically between the serpent and the woman is the relationship of temptation and sin and the feminine instinct. And the next episode, we'll see sort of the masculine instinct to sin and sort of where they come from. Mm-hmm. So the first thing to recognize here, by the fact that the serpent is talking to the woman, not the man, is that actually temptation appeals to our feminine instinct, not our masculine, because the temptation is not shared with the masculine. Mm-hmm. It's temptation connects with our feminine thinking. But temptation, too, this is interesting. It doesn't paint a picture for us. It doesn't tell us exactly what we're going to get for our sin, right? For what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. The way temptation works is it sort of just gives us a little hint and then lets our own mind run wild. That's what we see in these verses here, right? The woman isn't duped by the serpent, right? That's not the way to look at this. It's just that the serpent puts a hint of a thought in her mind. And then we see in this verse here that she sort of runs wild with it. She sees all of this potential in the fruit, right? She sees how it might be good, how it could be worthwhile. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting to me, that is sort of the way in which at least our feminine instinct can be sort of drawn towards and compelled towards sin, is a little hint of something, and then we tell a story in our head and we make up how this sin is going to be worthwhile. It's going to be okay if we do this negative thing, because look at all the good that comes from it. So it's really not a negative thing, because look all the good that might come from it. So that's interesting, I guess. That's I think the way temptation and our thought patterns, particularly the feminine instinct, work together. So any thoughts on that? Or
are we suggesting maybe that then the feminine is more has a higher capacity for being imaginative?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yes. And we'll even see that too. That's when we get to see the consequences of sin and the idea of childbirth and what that sort of symbolizes. We'll see more of that capacity, that idea, that new creation, creative things, right? New perspectives, new ideas, all of that. That's all born out of the feminine instinct.
Well, and that's very interesting, because if you think about if you think about the feminine, and we've gone back to this, again, we're equating these things abstractly, but also there's some sort of biological sense, but they're a little bit abstract too. But if we look at feminine in the biological sense of the biggest distinguisher is men don't bear children for 9 months and women bear children for 9 months. There is a way in which, and we hinted at this before, that women act as selectors in humans, kind of because of that fact, because they need to know that they're going to select somebody who's going to be able to help sustain them for the period where they would be physically at a disadvantage because they're bearing a child.
Right.
That framework does fundamentally make you more future looking. You have to plan for the future. You have to think in a future sense, as opposed to just what is presently happening. What am I doing right now? No, you're thinking, I'm going to have to plan for years ahead.
Which explains why women would, it's not to me that like why women would have more feminine instinct, right? It's not that having a feminine instinct makes one a woman. It's that if you are a woman, you would be better in tune with a feminine way of thinking.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Especially if we're identifying them as perspectives.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then if we can bridge the gap between the future and the imaginative, if you are future looking, you are a lot likely that seems to lay the seeds for a more imaginative mindset, because imagination, or future planning, actually, let me say future planning, involves painting out multiple different scenarios and playing those out in your head and seeing what they would come to. What would be the conclusion of this and this and this? And that's an imaginative activity. So those aren't realities, but they're potential realities.
So that
you're
gets
playing out those potential realities. And that's where the serpent then could take advantage of that and add a seductive potential reality.
Well, I would go a step further and say that's actually why the fruit of this tree is so tempting, because it's a tree of knowledge.
Yeah.
And if you're looking future oriented, if you're trying to imagine all the different scenarios and all of these things, your friend in that process is knowledge. Right. The problem here, though, right, is that it says that she sees how it would be good for wisdom. And that is the mistake, right? She mistakes knowledge for wisdom. And knowledge is an awareness of information about reality, but wisdom is knowing what to do with it.
Yeah.
And so that is the problem, I guess, with eating the fruit of the tree, right? This is beware of unearned wisdom, right? That's a phrase that is fairly well known, probably not as well known as it should be. But it's actually not wisdom that is the problem there. It's actually beware of unearned knowledge. It's when you get unearned knowledge that you lack the wisdom. And that's really the way we should think about that. And so that's what we're seeing in this verse here, is that she thinks that the knowledge will give her wisdom, but that's not how that works. You can have lots of knowledge and very little wisdom. That's certainly the case.
This would be comparable to let's give a like an example in the modern sense of a group of people who are constantly trying to understand the future, like stock investors or any type of investor. They might be able to collect data that might indicate trends or indicate what a market is presently doing, knowledge. But the person who is an effective investor, who manages to make money out of that, is the person who has not the knowledge. They need the knowledge, but also has the wisdom in this context of what I do with that. Where do I place my investments then in order to maximize the facts that are there? that I see happening.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the separation. Is it's like, well, it's not just having knowledge, it's also the wisdom is kind of the key pin there.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's
Absolutely.
interesting.
All right. So that's just the and again, this is a universal thing, right? All of us need to be aware, because we all have feminine instincts and masculine instincts. All of us need to be aware of the ways in which our feminine instinct can fall victim of temptation, right?
Yeah.
And that is a pathway to sin for us.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's useful to understand and look at this particular situation, going back to even the last couple episodes, what exactly the serpent said to the woman, how he used half truths and used things that allowed the woman's mind to sort of run wild with the ideas. That's the pathway to sin. That's how the temptation works. And that really the decision to sin, as we see here, it wasn't made by the serpent. It was made by the woman. She thought it through and decided, oh, I'm going to do this, right? And that's that level of personal responsibility. But again, looking at this as the story of universal sin, that's why we would want to know that, right? We would all want to be aware of what risk, I guess, is inherent for us to be tempted to sin. So, all right, with that, we're going to look next time at this situation with the man and how this happened. And it's interesting. There's some very curious questions that come up there. And I will say too, for this episode, next one, we are leaving out looking at the ways in which these things have been interpreted by other people. We could respond to those because there's quite a few. Many of them, I think, have had very negative consequences of the way these are interpreted. Perhaps down the road we'll respond to some of those ideas, or if listeners want us to, feel free to comment or get a hold of us, email something, let us know if you would like us to discuss any particular other interpretations. But suffice to say, oftentimes there has been blame put on women specifically because of this, and they're considered to be weaker or more open to temptation or all of those kind of things. I would actually maybe even argue the inverse, right? Going to that thing you were talking about, right? About how women would naturally be more in touch with a feminine way of thinking. And actually, if you're more in touch with your feminine way of thinking, maybe you might be actually better able to handle temptation that addresses that way of thinking particularly, right? And maybe actually men who are more in touch with a sort of masculine way of thinking actually leave themselves more open to temptation via their sort of feminine side as well. So you could make both cases, I guess I would say. But yeah, we're sort of skipping going into detail on all of that because I don't think it's worth our while to do right now. Again, if people want us to address those specifically, we can. But part of it is there is almost too many to respond to, too many other interpretations of this. So we're just we're sort of giving our look at it as we go through this. So,
and I think that's been our tendency going through because obviously Genesis.
We've addressed a few things here and there, but
is loaded with a lot. And there's been a lot of things said on it. In an amount that you couldn't digest in a lifetime has been said on it. But if there are things specifically that people want us to address, I think we'd be happy to. But mostly it's keeping an eye towards what you see as the truth rather than keeping an eye towards just knocking down all the lies, because that's actually a little bit of an easier game, is to just say, as we talked about with the serpent, it's easier to look at a bunch of other things and say, oh, that's wrong, but like, that's the harder thing, is to ask yourself, well, what actually is true.
Exactly.
And so our eye has been a little bit more towards that. And so if you want us to talk about some of those other things, I think we're open to that.
Indeed. All right, with that in mind, feel free to write us at unschooltheology@protonmail.com, or leave comments on whatever video channel you're watching this on. If you're on a podcast, a review that is always helpful. And let us know what you think. Share it with friends, and we'll be back next time.